Welcome to Zero Trust World 2024. Cybersecurity is everyone's business, but for IT professionals, it's critical. Over 3 days, you'll get the cybersecurity education that you need. We'll show you the latest threats and hacking techniques, and how to harden your environment in commonly weaponized applications like RMMs and Office 365.
Really informative. I actually just went to the Metasploit lab. They were showing us how to use like an SMB exploit, which was pretty cool.
Hacking labs are amazing, and actually seeing how you can do things that will fix the problem.
Definitely recommend the event. I mean, the hacking labs are fantastic. Definitely learned a lot.
Not only will you have an educational and enjoyable experience, you'll get actionable insights to take back to your organization to better your security. Zero Trust World is your all-access pass to the state of default denied. Register today to join us in Orlando this February for Zero Trust World 2024.
Visit ThreatLocker.com to reserve your pass now.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining us today. We're joined by Rob, Allen, and Ivan again. Unfortunately, we're going to do something slightly different this time. So for those of you who missed, we had a webinar a couple of weeks ago where we managed to take full control over Rob's Mac using a wireless Bluetooth headset without Rob, as the user, having to click on anything or do anything. So the objective of that webinar was to prove that Macs are not better. And Rob is still...
Mostly better, Danny, mostly better. In this particular one small instance, slightly not as much.
Yeah, if you did miss it, it's on our YouTube channel. You can watch it. It really is fun. Essentially, what we did is we managed to intercept the Bluetooth connection between Rob's headset and his Mac and turn that Bluetooth connection into a keyboard where we essentially rubber duckied his Mac through his Bluetooth connection, opening a reverse shell and gaining full control over his Mac.
I'm not going to lie. It was pretty cool. Macs are still better, but it was pretty cool.
They're more expensive.
Yeah, well,
so today we're going to do it slightly differently. I'm actually going to play victim today. So I'm going to put on my dumb hat and say, I'll do anything you want, Mr. Nice Man from Microsoft. And Rob's going to play the bad guy. Robin, with the assistance of Ivan, is going to play the bad guy. So I've got two victim laptops here to my right. And Rob, it's over to you. What we want to do
I was going to say, if we were doing this properly, I should really ring you. So I'm just you're gonna get a phone call from Microsoft now in a second. You might want to answer it.
Yeah, there's a really dodgy looking guy with a very red face on my phone.
So okay, ignore the fact that it's from that number. Anyway, what happens is they'll ring unsuspecting people up. They'll say, you've got a problem with your computer. I'm here from Microsoft and I'm going to help you out. Fun fact, I actually cancelled several phone lines back home because the only calls I would get were from Microsoft scammers. And the even funner part was I didn't have one Windows machine in the house. So they'd ring me up and I'd be like,
no, I'm a Mac user. You haven't watched many videos.
I don't have any Windows. I'm very sorry. But anyway, look, unsuspecting people. I mean, we've had customers quite recently who said to us, thank God you saved our ass. A customer was literally falling for this. They were trying to run AnyDesk to let somebody into their computer to help them out with a problem. And obviously ThreatLocker blocked it.
Well, let's talk about that because often Microsoft will use, sorry, not Microsoft, our residents will use tools like AnyDesk or LogMeIn Rescue or any of those tools.
Longer, any number of different legitimate tools.
To actually connect to your machine, and they'll convince a user to run it. But also, sometimes they won't do that because it's not always through a phone call, it's through an email link, and they'll get a reverse shell. And a lot of cyber attacks happen from reverse shells, and not the main launch of the attack. But in order to, if you put yourself in the mind of a criminal, I want to get access to as many businesses as possible and encrypt as many files as possible and extract much data as possible. Because if I do that, my probability of being paid increases. And there's two ways they can do that. One is they can literally just target you. So they'll go on your website, they'll say who your staff are, they'll look at your social media, they'll actually target ads towards you on social media. And you may download something, or a reverse shell or remote access tool, you may call that 1-800-Windows support number and get help from a very nice man who's actually just putting malware on your machine. Other ways is they'll often send you a Word document. They'll exploit a vulnerability in Office. They'll send you a fake invoice to download. There'll be an HTML file in an email. I get about 4 of those a day saying there's an urgent payment information. And
Little do they know they're onto a loser because you never pay your bills anyway.
Yeah, that's true. And they'll get a reverse shell on your machine. Once they have a reverse shell onto your machine, and you might not be that important in the company, they can really laterally move around your environment, because now they can start doing IP scans of your environment. They can switch files out and file shares to additional malware. They can potentially gain access, put keyloggers on the machine, wait for an IT guy to come in and gain access to Active Directory or any of your IT tools. And eventually from there, it just becomes really, really bad news. And normally that starts with something as simple as a user enabling macros, opening an Office document, downloading something they shouldn't have done. And the attacker gets command line access to their machine. And from there, they can do whatever they want. I remember I was working on a case where I had to get into a company with their consent. My objective was to get data off their share. And unfortunately, the person I got to open my reverse shell was not very privileged, and she didn't have access to any of that data. But she did have access to other shares. And what I did is I switched out files on the other shares to Excel files, or Excel files with executables that opened the original Excel file and then created reverse shell on more machines. So from one reverse shell, I was able to create 5, 6, 7 reverse shells very, very quickly. And then eventually I got the data I needed and got paid. I was doing it with their consent, of course. In this case, we've got 3 different examples of reverse shells we're going to use, and I'll let Ivan explain them more. We've got a executable-based one. We've got a fileless one using PowerShell, and we're going to deliver that through an OMG cable, are we?
Yep, that is correct. We're going to deliver it via OMG cable, and we're going to actually be able to trigger it remotely. So I can be on this other side of the building, other side of the room. I log into a front-end portal that's hosted by the OMG cable, which is the interesting part about OMG cables. The moment you plug them in, they basically open an SSID where you can connect to and remotely just execute the payload. So you don't have to be there.
Is this our OMG cable?
Yeah, that is an OMG cable. I have one here.
This is not very convincing.
Well, in that case,
It literally has OMG written on it.
Does it?
Yeah.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't have OMG.
No, it doesn't have the OMG written on it.
Well, no, but my iPhone cable's white. But you got a white one though.
I do have a white one. We got that one just to, that's for testing. We want to make sure that we don't confuse our cables and start plugging in malicious cables into our machines. But I do have a white one, a C to C. This one's a bidirectional one, so both ends are actually active. So no matter what end I connect into a PC, I can execute malicious payloads from this end or from this end. And as you see, there is no difference than an Apple charger or a Mac charger or whatever you want to call it, or an Android charger. They're just regular C cables. And that's the dangerous part of it. You plug these in not knowing what they are, and in the back end, they're wreaking havoc on your endpoints.
And I will say, as someone who's paranoid nut, I could actually get tricked by this, because I do have iPhone cables on my desk. I do plug them in. I do charge my phones from them. And it would be very easy if you were to put your cable, not this one here, which doesn't look anything like an iPhone cable, on my desk.
Well, you say that, but I have had several moments of panic where I've got a hacking kit that I bring around me to various places. I also have a bunch of cables that I bring with me for charging things. I have had several circumstances and situations where I have been not sure as to which one was the OMG cable and which one was the actual legitimate iPhone charging cable.
And you cannot tell the difference. I mean, maybe you should get a microphone out.
Plug it in, look for a network called OMG is your best bet.
Yep.
But it doesn't have to be called OMG. It could be called anything.
Or you have to buy their detector. It's the only way of actually doing it. There's no other way to tell.
Do not use anyone else's cable, and paint your cable in special colors. That's the trick. Okay, so I've got 2 victims here because I'm going to be the victim. So which one do you want me to use here? I've got this one here, which came from Rob. And I've got this one here, which came from Ivan. Any particular flavor of which one you want me to share the screen off first? Okay.
Take a break.
Okay, I'm not sure. I'm gonna click share screen. Hopefully one of these works. I don't want 2 videos. There's enough on my face. Let me share screen. These computers have Windows Defender on them. They may or may not be running ThreatLocker in secured mode. We're not really sure. They're running ThreatLocker in some kind of mode. And what do you want me to do first? So I'm logged in here as a user.
And if you notice, there's a file in there called invoices, and if you actually go to your desktop, can you minimize those 2 pages and go into your desktop so we can see what that file looks like to the naked eye?
Okay, let me see if I can. Zoom is in my way everywhere because this 12-inch screen. Windows used to have a feature if you shook, and now it's
there you go.
There you go.
You have a nice little file there called invoices, and to the naked eye, it looks like a Word document. But if you click it, Actually, go ahead and click it. Alrighty, don't tell Danny, but I'm currently working on a reverse shell that's going to completely obliterate his machine. What I mean by this is I'm writing a reverse shell in a language called Go, and what it's going to do is going to use a living off the land tactic. It's going to use a start process by PowerShell. It's a CMD that will basically bypass most CDRs, but it won't bypass ThreatLocker because, I mean, we have ring fencing. I'm going to tell Danny to turn ThreatLocker off. You know what? Let's go a little bit into the code and see exactly what's happening. Alright, so a little bit on the code. On the top section, we're going to be importing FMT, which is basically going to be able to print out output to the terminal. We're going to be using OSExec to be able to execute commands on the victim's machine. We're going to define a variable called PowerShell command. That's what's going to store our actual PowerShell command that we're going to be using to establish the reverse shell. Below, then we're going to call PowerShell to actually run that command. And if we have any errors, we want it to output it. We can actually put in some text here so Danny knows that it was us. So we're going to go ahead and type in victim pwned by ThreatLocker ops. So in this case, Danny will know that it was us who took over his machine. But you know what? Let's go see Danny's point of view.
Do you want me to play the game of disable ThreatLocker? This is the number one question asked by our customers. I need to disable ThreatLocker so my pen tester can get into our system. So should we do that thing where we disable ThreatLocker?
I think we should. It's the only way to go around it at the moment, yeah. Okay,
so and we'll just go back to regular TAV. This is 07, I think. I have a lot of it. I'm going to switch ThreatLocker into monitor only mode. You have 1 hour to take full control of my system. Okay, there you go. So
I reckon it'll take him about 2 minutes.
And just to be clear, that obviously that invoice is an executable. And when it tried to run ThreatLocker, said, no, this is not on my trusted list of executables, so go away. So let's try again. Hopefully I've waited long enough.
I think so.
Oh, there you go.
Yep. So I put it to run in verbose mode so we can see what's happening. So it's going to send a reverse shell. And if you notice there, the file deleted itself. But if I share my screen on my end, can you guys see my screen here?
Yes.
C2. So on my left-hand side, per usual, we have our C2 server listening out on the internet for connections over port 5757. In this case, when Danny clicked that file, it sent a connection over. And we're going to go a bit more into detail on how that connection was established. But here we see we have access to C user's victim desktop. And if I ask the computer, who am I? It's going to say, your victim on victim machine 07. Danny, if you checked on your machine, right after it ran, it deleted itself. And this is called self-deleting malware. So what it does is it launches processes to be able to establish that connection, that TCP connection between the C2 server and the victim. But once that's done, it has a specific command that it's told, specific instructions that it's told, hey, delete yourself so nobody knows that you were in that machine. So I have a connection to your machine with no physical trace of that file being actually on your machine. And if we actually go in right here,
I have a little tip for anyone who wants to write malware that actually doesn't get detected as well. If you want to self-delete your malware, don't self-delete the malware. Rename it from the process itself to a separate file name that is not an executable, that's unrelated, and then delete that. It's less likely to get detected because it is a common trend of malware to self-delete. Therefore, a lot of AVs will go, wait there, I just saw a process, self-delete, it might be bad. Let me go and shut it down. If you do it a slightly different way and you rename it first and then delete the rename, you're less likely to get detected.
Yep, that is completely true. So just for proof of concept here, we could make you launch YouTube on your machine. And if you see on your left-hand side there, on your right-hand side, I don't know if you want to share your screen.
I'm just trying to exit full screen. I didn't see YouTube launch, by the way.
It didn't?
No, it didn't.
Oh, that's weird.
Rob, you lose.
Let's check now. If your calculator just execute.
Oh, calculator executed, yeah.
Okay, so we do have command execution. That's a proof of concept that we do have full control over his machine. And to go a bit more into detail, Danny was saying that usually what people do is if they basically compromise a low-level user's machine, what they can do is they try to sniff the network and see if they can move laterally. In this case, we could do like an IP config to figure out if this machine is dual homed or if it's single home. In this case, we have a single home. But once the attacker has control over your PC, they can scan your network and try to move laterally and gain access to a higher admin user or another machine in the network.
So pretty simple, really. User runs something, you gain access, you can now do whatever you want. You can see network drives, you can...
I mean, it's as good as sitting at the machine.
So what's the difference between an RMM and a reverse shell?
RMM can do it at a very higher scale.
One of them you get given, you get gifted, and the other ones you have to pay for.
Exactly. Good answer.
So, okay.
Daniel Velez has asked, would this be picked up by a SOC who's monitoring the system's EDR?
So the answer, I don't know about Ivan's reverse shell, but the answer to my reverse shell was no. It never got detected. However, the reverse shell itself might not get detected unless, so if you think how a SOC is working, it's looking for indicators of compromise. So if you run a brand new unknown program, it's probably not going to be considered an indicator of compromise, because otherwise you're just using allow listing. If you were running, so if I go and write a reverse shell, run it. Now, what I do may get me shut down. So this is where you have to be really careful. If you're an attacker and you're on a network, if you want to go and swap some files on a network share, it's not going to hit any known indicators of compromise, probably. If you go and run an advanced IP scanner, now you might suddenly trigger a SOC alert. So you have to be careful about running IP scanners. It may be better to do it slower, not scan entire networks at the same time, not use known IP scanners to build your own IP scanners into your tool so it doesn't trigger, oh, someone just ran an angry IP. I know that's an indicator of compromise. If you were to go out and run certain PowerShell commands, it may trigger an indicator of compromise. But I know for a fact, and maybe we can run it afterwards, we have one that will exfil all of your data, and it's never been triggered by any EDR, despite the fact multiple CEOs of security companies have seen me do it on stage and seen you do it on stage, Rob, and they still haven't added in as a known indicator of compromise. But if you do something that triggers a known indicator of compromise, possibly. Tricks: don't run known IP scanning tools. Don't run Mimikatz. You're going to get tripped up if you run Mimikatz once you're on the machine. Don't talk to foreign servers. I notice you're not Ivan, but try and use HTTPS with all of your communications, because HTTPS is considered normal web traffic, so less likely to get alerted. All of these are things you can do to reduce your probability of being detected. And trick number 5 is do everything as fast as possible, because even if it does get picked up by an EDR, or a SOC, most SOCs are responding, take time, and get something else on there. And of course, the reason you self-deleted, Ivan, is so there's no trace of what happened. They just saw an alert, they checked out the machine.
Checking, there's nothing to see.
It looks perfectly clean. But again, the indicators of compromise will be picked up more like I'm doing a DDoS attack or a brute force attack on an RDP server or something like that.
But I mean, the likelihood is that what Ivan just did probably isn't going to get picked up by a SOC. Realistically,
not by itself. I wouldn't say so.
No, I wouldn't think so. Herbert has asked, why are you guys talking like you are giving the bad guys tips on how not to get detected? Aren't you the good guys?
So look, I've been trying to give the good guys some tips as well. I think the reality is these are tips that are already used and already out there on how not to get detected. Then we're not helping the bad guys. What we're trying to do is make sure you guys know that this is how they're getting around, and you can appropriately defend against it. And this particular case, we could have stopped this attack very, very easily by blocking up untrusted software, and it never would have happened. Unfortunately, it does happen all the time, because still the majority of companies, that majority is getting smaller and smaller and smaller as we travel around the world and make sure everyone's using ThreatLocker. But the majority of companies still allow untrusted executables to run, and they believe that by not being a local admin, which I'm not on this machine, it's going to stop bad things happening. It doesn't stop bad things happening in most cases. It allows bad software to run. So
Daniel actually made a valid point, which is they are good ethical hacker tips for prospecting.
That's another way of looking at it. But but the reality is these are the tips that they're using, and every day they change them. The reality is you can recompile code in a different language. You can put more good code in there. You can make your software do something out. There's a million combinations these guys can do to avoid getting detected, and they will. Now,
David asked a question, which is, does this reverse shell sustain a reboot?
No, it does. Well, this one
does not.
Doesn't.
But it can by putting it into the startup folder or copying something into the startup folder.
So this particular one doesn't, but very often they can.
Yep.
There's a little trick on that as well. A lot of the smarter reverse shells will not put something in the startup folder on launching. They'll put it in the startup folder on ending. And the reason they do that is because when you do it on launching, it's more likely to be scrutinized by it. Say you've got sandboxing on your antivirus. It goes right there. I consider putting something in the startup folder bad behavior. And what it'll do is it'll sandbox that program. It'll open it and see if it does something bad in the first 30 seconds. A lot of these smart ones will say, okay, I'm going to run for a while and I won't put anything in the startup folder for at least an hour of running. That way I'm less likely to be detected.
Yep. Danny, we got another very good suggestion from David, which is Windows G to minimize all windows and show desktop. Windows key D, apparently.
Oh, there you go. That's useful. So
the shape to minimize.
I think the next thing we're going to show is the OMG cable, do we?
Mm-hmm.
Now, the OMG cable is less relevant than the PowerShell part of this. So I'm going to share my screen again and share screen. And I'm going to minimize everything here. So I'm back to my victim machine here. And when I plug this in, this is actually not going to run an executable. So if you were blocking untrusted software, this would still be able to run. When I plug this machine in here, if I can find this cable here. When I plug this in, I guess nothing's going to happen. You're going to get a Wi-Fi signal. So difference between an OMG cable and a rubber ducky is when you plug a rubber ducky in, the payload delivers immediately. When you plug a OMG cable in, nothing happens other than it broadcasts a Wi-Fi signal. And then Ivan can connect to the Wi-Fi signal and he can deliver his keystrokes remotely later on. If you're using a Mac, you don't even need to plug it in. You just tap into the Bluetooth headset.
Yep. So you guys see this? You might not be able to see it, but this is the front end in which I can communicate with that OMG cable. So I'm going to go over to file menu. And the crazy part about this is we have over 50 payloads that we can pre-program into that OMG cable to be able to launch. In this case, we're going to be able to launch. I mean, Danny, it's up to you. Do you want this to go slow or do you want it to go really, really fast?
Well, I don't want it to go anywhere, but
okay.
But just to be clear, it's going to go somewhere because we've disabled ThreatLocker.
Exactly. So we'll do a little bit slow just for proof of concept, and we're going to go ahead and build and run. So anytime now, your machine should be executing a PowerShell command.
Oh,
there we go.
So now,
bit of a delay. Should be good now.
So this is essentially let's type this in.
So what you guys are seeing here is a living off the land tactic. I go over this a lot in demonstrations, and what I try to tell people is that this is fileless malware. So you didn't download anything on your computer. It's just the command that's run off of a cmd-let function in PowerShell. And the reason this can be dangerous is because EDR sometimes isn't ready for things like this. You're leveraging native tools that some people are just familiar with, and some people feel as if PowerShell is secure. So they're like, why would PowerShell do anything malicious? I try to tell people the best of hackers can completely destroy your endpoints with just Windows native tools. So you have to be aware of that. And maybe Danny can emphasize a bit more on how ThreatLocker puts a stop to these type of attacks.
Okay, so in this case, have you gained persistent access to my machine, or at least semi-persistent access?
Yeah, I do have access to your machine. I could share my screen here.
What I was going to say is, do you want to try and start a program or do something?
Yeah.
Scary. My hands are here.
Usually for me, it's opening Tinder for some reason.
It's just your history. What I'm doing is pulling up your web history up.
That should do something. It's loading. You do have a connection.
Just there you go. So we got YouTube.
Yep. So we could do things like this. We could start calculator. We could, in fact, we could even, let me see if I can. We can pop a calc like we usually do. We could even access one of their, we go into desktop and we could open up Tor browser.
Do we have Tor browser on here?
I think so. I think I just started it.
This is a really good victim machine.
Yeah. So we basically have full control over the machine. I had a few links here, but I lost them. I was gonna launch a few cool things, but in essence, we could practically do whatever we want. And to answer the question of the other person is, do we have persistence, or are we able to launch an attack again after reboot? We could be able to by modifying registry keys, or in this case, I could manually input into the command line to basically add my process to startup. So every time the machine starts up, it's going to send a call back to my C2 server, and essentially I'll have connection whenever.
And you know what's particularly nice about this is you've got persistence twice. Because you've got it through the OMG cable and you've got it through the reverse shell. Now, just
Danny, can I just say everybody's freaking out about the battery on the victim machine?
Oh, I can see everyone's freaking out. But
Yeah.
I have full confidence. It's not a Mac. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen here and I'm going to show you what happened in the background. And I'm also going to get Ivan to do some. Have you got your data exfil script there? The one
I'm
we
looking
use
for it right now.
I'm going to share my screen here. Share screen.
I think I uploaded. Yeah, I think I might have uploaded something. You might want to check the front end of the cloud.
So oh, the bucket. Okay. Well, I don't think you did. Unless you just you just did it the second, or
I just did it the second. Yeah.
Okay. So here in ThreatLocker, a couple of things to notice. Obviously, we can see earlier on our invoices. We're running what's called a simulated deny. So if you don't know the ThreatLocker portal, we have the ability to do, even when we're in monitor mode, to simulate denies as if we were locked down. And the reason we do this is so when you're onboarding ThreatLocker, you can make sure nothing's going to break before you lock down. In this case, of course, we're actually in monitor mode. So what we do is we deploy ThreatLocker, we run this simulated deny, and we can see everything that tried to run during that period. So a couple of things that are important that would have been blocked. One is we would have seen this invoices.exe blocked. Here, we would have seen it ring-fenced because I guess the process you were using was command prompt. So command prompt by default inside ThreatLocker doesn't have the ability to access your protected files. Your desktop is considered a protected file. Therefore, if we were in secure mode, we wouldn't be able to self-delete either. Even if we had managed to open it, of course, we would be able to open it to begin with. The next thing that's worth noting is we see here that a random IP address connection. Again, normal attackers don't connect directly to IP addresses, and the smarter ones are using port 443. You can see PowerShell directly tried to go up to there. PowerShell doesn't need to go out to the internet, and if it does, it's to selected locations. By stopping PowerShell go out to the internet, you can stop attackers using PowerShell, Redshift, run DLL for tools like this as well. And you mentioned as well, you've got the Google Cloud. So let me see if I can find that. I didn't see it pop up, by the way, your exfil script, so I don't know if it ran.
I'm not sure either.
Unless you don't have any files on this.
I'm running the process as a Windows hidden terminal, so it might not pop up.
So while you're looking at that, you've kind of answered this question already, but it's a question of 3 parts, Danny. So how does ThreatLocker prevent fileless attacks? I mean, that's fundamentally ring fencing what you just explained. They also are asking, and this is Herbert's asking this question, how does it distinguish between trusted and untrusted executables? Does it scan systems, inventory all executables, and trust them? So do you want to run with that?
Yeah, so essentially when you deploy ThreatLocker, what it's going to do, and it's not about trusted or untrusted, it's about do we need it or don't we need it? Because TeamViewer may be used in your organization, but it could also be used by a scammer. So you want to limit the applications to only what you need. So what we'll do is we'll first catalog your environment, we'll go into a learning period, and we'll tell you all of the programs that you're running in your environment. The second, and then after about a week of learning, 2 weeks of learning, you can go on and you can see all of those programs. Now, what ThreatLocker will do is it'll show you the programs, and with our new health report, we'll even show you the risks associated with those programs. So, for example, if you're running 7-zip, we'll say, okay, you're running 7-zip. This is what it does. These are the risks associated. 1 is its code's compiled in Russia. 2 is that it's able to encrypt files as part of its features. So what are the, and then we'll give you remediation tips, such as if you don't need it, remove it. Or if you do need it, maybe limit what it can access. So you can say with ring fencing, don't let it access my files. So if it is compromised or if it is weaponized, it won't be able to access your files. It's a very simple process. And then if you do want to approve new software, a user can request access to it. We're using a simple pop-up, and the administrator can approve it. And when the administrator does approve it, they'll be able to check it in our
60
environment.
seconds.
Well, they can approve it in 60 seconds, but they can test it in our testing environment first to see exactly what it's doing before they go off and approve that. And it takes 60 seconds to approve something new.
And the last question of Herbert's 3 was, what happens when the executables hash changes due to updates?
So the ThreatLocker validates and tracks about 2,500 different applications. So everything from Office to Chrome to Zoom to Putty to Notepad to RMM tools to remote access tools. So if you have a policy using one of our matched applications, we actually track the updates for you. Even if you don't have a policy, we're able to make sure that even if we don't have it as a tracked application, we're able to make sure that those applications continue to work. So for example, there's a piece of dental software called Henry Schein Dental Software. Every time it executes, the hash changes, not for an update, but every time it executes. But the master process, so there's a service that changes the hash. So what we're able to do in those cases, we're able to say, okay, we recognize Henry Schein. We're going to create a custom rule that as long as this update process or this service makes the change, the new hash will be able to run. And you can use certificate rules. You can use custom rules of process, what process created it, as well as what process is calling it. And normally you'll figure them out during your simulation period if you do have any strange applications. The reality is 99% of the applications that self-update, we're probably tracking for you already.
Yeah, the vast majority of users use the same software in the same way every single day. And effectively all we're doing is setting guardrails around that and saying, look, operate like that, you're going to be fine. Craig asked a question, which is, are these OMG cables local only hacks over Wi-Fi, or do they exist in internet form also? It's actually an interesting question. Short answer is they are local because effectively they're broadcasting a wireless signal, but it could be argued that could you tweak it, Ivan? Could you?
Well, you'd have to put a SIM card in it.
That's a good. I mean, it's possible.
Yeah.
It hasn't been.
Is it possible to get an OMG? And I've never tried this. Can you get an OMG cable to run something automatically rather than waiting for?
Oh yes, you can. You can.
Well, that probably answers the question then, because you could literally just do the reverse shell using the OMG cable on connection.
Yeah, there's a function called start on boot or run on connection.
So I think not to get tied up with the OMG cable, because the OMG cable in this case is the delivery mechanism of the reverse shell. I would almost guarantee that you can get through 100, and if you've got 100 employees, one of those employees is going to click on something and give you the reverse shell, whether it's an executable, whether it's a Word document, or whether it's just a vulnerability. So Felina last year, with the vulnerability with Felina, we could gain instant access using the reverse shell just by opening a regular Word document without enabling macros. So there's lots of different ways you can get a reverse shell. In this case, it's our delivery mechanism, but there's lots of other options as well. We can create a reverse shell like we did last week with your Bluetooth headset, Rob.
Correct. Curtis says, and he's not wrong, the safest machine is a powered off machine. So maybe your battery dying on your laptop is actually a way of protecting yourself. Chase, would the hash still update if the application is permitted through an application group as well, or does it only work with matched applications?
You could say this updater is allowed to update this hash, and then and on the machine that the updater runs would say this new hash is allowed to run, or if it's a built-in application, we're doing it for you. So it's regardless to whether it's on the machine or not. If you've got a policy for Office, the new version of Office is always going to run.
Dave Barnes, hi Dave, I know Dave, has asked, what interface do OMG Cables / Rubber Duckies appear as in the application control policies in ThreatLocker? Short answer, Dave, is no interface, because the keyboard is a keyboard, and an OMG Cable is a Wi-Fi. Well, sorry, it's Wi-Fi and keyboard, so it doesn't show up anywhere.
If they were, I don't know if you can twin duck an OMG cable, can you? So with a Rubber Ducky, you can twin duck it, and you can have the storage
inside. Yeah.
Yeah, in that case, it'd be USB, but I don't know if you can do that with an OMG cable. Can you?
No, you can't.
But good question, Dave. And Andrew Baker has asked, can it be used on the internet? An ISP in my city has ISP open wireless networks free to use anywhere. Register one MAC address with it, spoof it, and now that cable may be weaponized via internet? Possibly.
Yeah. I believe so.
Oh, someone mentioned, does ThreatLocker block fileless malware? I did some tests myself and it blocked this fileless script from running on my endpoint. Now, it's a link to a GitHub with invoke Mimikatz, which I am very much not going to click on my machine. Danny, do you want to click on that on your victim machine and see what happens?
Let's see if I can get it from the chat.
Not that I've any fear or anything, but
No, I can tell you exactly. Let me have a look at the script. It's in the Q&A here.
It's the injection of Mimikatz via the invoke PowerShell method.
I was using back. And in this case, yes, it would block it. It won't block it in this case because I'm in monitor only mode.
Is it PowerShell it uses?
It does use PowerShell, yeah.
Yeah, well, that's basically the ring fencing is the answer to that question.
Yeah, and there's also a version where you can use regserve as well to run code from a GitHub repository. So in those cases, it will be blocked using ring fencing in both cases.
Agnel is saying, do this on a test machine.
This is my test machine. but I'm not going to click on it because it's not even opening the browser, which is probably why you couldn't start the browser. It appears as though I have no default browser set.
Moss Jacobson has asked, what are the capabilities of OMG cables to compromise mobile devices? And if so, which protections or what protections are recommended?
So OMG cables tend to work on the computer end, but is there any reason they wouldn't work on the phone end? Because there is malicious charging cables that affect phones. And if there's the FBI have wrote an advisory out there not to use public charging stations because of that reason. But I haven't actually seen it operate on a phone yet. Have you seen one?
If you program it correctly, it can. Even the flipper itself, you just have to change the keyboard layout itself and be able to control the phone. Be a bit more complicated, but it's definitely possible. At the end of the day, it really is just a keyboard. It's sending out input. It's sending in inputs to a machine, so you can do it on a phone itself as well.
Okay. Do we have any final questions you want to get answered, Rob?
Has ThreatLocker ever been beat by high memory exploits? I've spent a significant amount. Sorry, this is Andrew Baker, by the way. I spent a significant amount of time thinking about it, how ThreatLocker could be beat. My thinking is that even if an exploit was able to run, for my research, a payload always has to be downloaded or a script needs to be run to attach to internet to exfiltrate data. I would love to hear your thoughts on the weak points most admins might be overlooking even with ThreatLocker.
So ThreatLocker's, like every security product, there's always ways around ThreatLocker. It's very hard because you have to get a foothold onto the system, and it's very hard to get a foothold onto the system
if you can't run anything.
However, where we tend to see people getting footholds is where someone's got 3389 open on the internet. Don't do that. It's a bad idea. But when you've got 3389 open on the internet, and we have honeypots out there with 3389 running ThreatLocker and lots of fake data, and there's been ways that you've managed to, admins who have gained access to the system have managed to either stop ThreatLocker, and we keep making our tamper protection harder and harder to get through, or also just say, hey, I managed to run this one line of code. I think what you're doing here is you're limiting the amount of damage to the application they're using. So for example, the Exchange vulnerability, that was a really, really bad vulnerability in that it allowed an attacker to basically crypto your entire domain without gaining access. So they could literally point at your Exchange server, they'd update the offline address book URL using the vulnerability. When an admin logged onto the Exchange server, it would run a script, which would then go off and create an group policy, which would then go off and push ransomware out to your entire organization. That's really bad. Now, using ring fencing, we're able to stop the script being created. Using whitelisting, we're able to stop the script being ran. Using whitelisting on the endpoints, we're able to stop the ransomware being ran. However, the vulnerability still allowed the attacker access to Exchange, because while we ring fence IIS, it can still access what it needs to access, which is Exchange. So it's not about beating or not beating. It's about managing to reduce the impact of the blast. And if you can do that by limiting what applications can do and what can run, at the end of the day, for someone to cause damage on your machine, they have to run or they have to weaponize an application against you. Where ThreatLocker fails most of the time, it's normally because someone allowed software they shouldn't have done, or because they didn't configure it in the hardest way. And every single customer of ThreatLocker could do more to configure their environments. If you are a partner and you say, well, what can I do more? Jump on with your solution engineer and say, how do I ring fence more? How do I put more storage policies in place? Because you can always do more. Our initial goal is to get the highest risk areas, running software, weaponizing common apps, and limiting what they can do. And that is really going to help you with very, very lift. But if you can do more all the time and you can harden your environment more.
I mean, realistically, you could say there's pretty much no limit to how hard or how much you can harden it. I mean, ring fencing everything is probably a good aim. I mean, we fundamentally do that ourselves. So everything that's allowed to run is pretty much ring fenced in some manner, shape, or form. As Danny said, storage control. limiting what can access your data is really, really, really important. And it's very, very effective, because realistically, even if something bad runs, if it can't get at your data, it's not going to be able to do any damage, and it's not going to be able to exfiltrate your data. So that is a huge thing, or a huge way of improving. And again, look, I work with so many customers. I mean, most of them get to the point where they have allow listing and ring fencing set up, and they go, okay, that's great. There is more you can do. There's always more you can do, and we're here to help you do more as well. Sorry, Andrew mentioned 3389 blocked by NAC, baby. I think technically it's called NC now, network control. But yes, absolutely, network control is something else that most organizations can do. Look, try
You know what I
do
love, and I know we're running out of time, but one of the things I love about network control that is often overlooked is you can do something called dynamic ACLs. So typically someone gets into your network and they're on your network and you're screwed. You have a server, but your server has no firewall on it because it's inside the network and it needs to serve. With network control, you can say only trusted devices can see the server. So if someone comes in with an untrusted device, does a network scan, they see nothing. And it's really cool in that how you do that. And I wanted to be really smart this weekend. I went home and I said, I'm going to reset up my Wi-Fi. Don't do it. It was really, really much harder than I thought. And I still haven't finished the end of it. And what I did is when I set up all the Wi-Fi, I was like, you know what? It has this setting where I can isolate every single device to itself. Why does any device need to see each other on the network? And I have network control on all our laptops. I have it on my kids' laptops. I'm happy that they're safe. But I was like, why do I need to do this? And so I set up the whole network. I spent 4 hours setting up the Wi-Fi, configuring it, and I set the TV up and the Bose sound system and everything else. And then I went to AirPlay something. Didn't work. So then I was like, oh crap, I have to open the network up. So then I created an IoT network and a separate network. And then it was like, well, should the Bose speaker be on the IoT network? And it got really messy. But what network control does is it means your laptops and your devices can be protected. By the way, I still haven't got my Wi-Fi fully working. My smoke alarms apparently are offline now. So
I was wondering, I got a whole bunch of notifications because I'm invited to your ring, and I got a bunch of notifications at the weekend saying this device is disconnected, this device is disconnected, this guy is disconnected. Oh, this device is reconnected. I was wondering what the hell it was. I thought you had a power outage or something, but it was you messing with your network, obviously.
Yes, I've got 80% done. The best advice I can give you out of that is if you do have a home Wi-Fi network and you've got and you don't reconfigure it, don't put a new Wi-Fi in, it's not worth it. So we give away 2 free tickets to Zero Trust World. If you have not been to Zero Trust World, it is a cybersecurity conference here in Orlando. It's in February. It's the nicest time to come to Orlando. It's 70-something degrees, clear blue skies, touch wood. And it's really nice time to be here. However, the event itself is awesome. We basically have labs on how to do this stuff hands-on, not a PowerPoint presentation, but we're going to give you a Ducky in your hand. We're going to teach you how to program it. We're going to do Metasploit labs. We're going to do all of those things, hands-on learning. We're also going to teach you how to harden your environment, what you can be doing to secure Windows Server and Office 365 and endpoints and Macs and all of these devices. So it's a great educational event. We do give CPE credits for it. We announced our speakers as well. So we have a bunch of cool speakers, but probably the most notable one is Mark Rober. He's the YouTuber that likes to break and blow glitter bombs in people's face when they steal packages off your porch. He was previously a NASA engineer. So we look forward to seeing everyone at Zero Trust World. It's Rob, Ivan, thank you as always.
Thank you, everyone.
We have one more webinar in a few weeks as well. So if you haven't already registered, you should get an email afterwards to register for that. Thank you for joining us and have a happy holidays, Merry Christmas, everyone.